Time is a liar. We invent it to make sense of chaos. We build clocks and calendars and count down seconds until midnight, pretending that when the hands meet at the top of the dial, the world washes clean. We tell ourselves that the sins of the old year stay in the old year. We tell ourselves that tomorrow is a fresh page, a blank slate, a new beginning. But sins do not look at calendars, and murder does not care what time it is. My name is Isla Wrynne, and I am a horologist. I fix broken time. I spend my life surrounded by gears and pendulums, the steady rhythmic heartbeat of brass and steel. I find comfort in mechanics because machines, unlike people, only break when there is a reason. A machine does not lie to you. A machine does not smile while it betrays you. If a clock stops, there is a broken tooth, a dry drop of oil, a bent spring. There is always a cause, and there is always a solution. I had been summoned to Blackwood Hall on December 31st, not to celebrate, but to work. The master of the house, a recluse named Isla Wrynne, possessed one of the rarest astronomical clocks in Europe. It was called the Chronos Aeterna. It was a masterpiece of 18th century engineering, a tower of gears that tracked not just the hours, but the phases of the moon, the tides, and the movement of the planets. It had not chimed for 20 years. Isla Wrynne wanted it to ring in the new year. He was insistent. He offered a fee that would pay the rent on my London workshop for 2 years. He said he was hosting a ball, a masquerade. He said it was going to be the party of the century. He did not tell me it would be his wake. The drive to Blackwood Hall was a battle against the elements. The estate sat atop a jagged spine of rock overlooking the North Sea, accessible only by a single-track causeway that flooded at high tide. Tonight the tide was low, but the snow was blinding. My little van skidded on the ice as I crossed the causeway. The heater rattled, fighting a losing war against the coastal wind. To my left, the dark ocean churned against the rocks, tossing up sprays of freezing foam that froze instantly on my windshield. To my right, the marshland stretched out into white nothingness. Ahead, the manor rose out of the whiteout, like a dark, jagged tooth. It was Gothic Revival architecture at its most imposing, all spires and gargoyles and stone that looked like it had been quarried from the ocean floor itself. Windows glowed warm and gold against the storm, tiny eyes watching my approach. It looked inviting. It looked like a Christmas card. But as I drove closer, I saw the cars parked in the circular drive. Bentleys, Rolls-Royces, a vintage Aston Martin silver, and sleek under a layer of fresh snow. The guests had already arrived. The vultures were gathering. I parked around the back near the service entrance, grabbing my heavy leather tool bag. It weighed 30 pounds, filled with the delicate instruments of my trade. Precision screwdrivers, brass hammers, vials of whale oil, and magnifying loops. I was not a guest. I was staff. In the world of the wealthy, that made me invisible. And invisibility, as I would soon learn, is a detective's greatest weapon. I was met at the service door by the butler, a man named Graves, who looked as if he had been carved out of the same gray stone as the house. He was tall, gaunt, and possessed a face that seemed incapable of smiling. "Miss Wrynne," he said, checking a silver pocket watch that he pulled from his waistcoat. "You are 11 minutes late." "The snow," I said, stomping my boots on the mat. The causeway was icy. "The snow is a condition, not an excuse," Graves replied. He stepped back to let me in. "Mr. Vane is waiting in the atrium. You have exactly 6 hours and 49 minutes until midnight. The clock must strike. I will do my best." "Do not do your best, Miss Wrynne. Do the job. Mr. Vane does not pay for effort. He pays for results." He led me through the corridors of the service wing. The transition from the cold, biting wind outside to the stifling heat of the house made my skin prickle. The air smelled of pine needles, beeswax, and expensive perfume, but underneath it there was something else, the faint smell of sulfur, like a match that had just been struck. We passed the entrance to the grand ballroom. The double doors were open, and I caught a glimpse of the party preparations. It was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto a polished checkerboard floor of black and white marble. Waiters in white gloves moved like chess pieces, adjusting silver cutlery and arranging towers of champagne flutes that sparkled like diamonds. A string quartet was warming up in the corner, the discordant tuning of violins sounding like nervous laughter. But the guests were the spectacle. They were wearing masks. Venetian masks with long noses, bejeweled masks with peacock feathers, leather masks that covered only the eyes. It was a sea of hidden faces. The theme grave said, noticing my stare is Janus, the two-faced god, looking back to the past and forward to the future. Fitting, I murmured. We continued to the center of the house, to the atrium. And there it was, the Chronos Aeterna. It dominated the room. It stood 20 feet tall, a cathedral of mahogany and glass. The face was intricate gold leaf on lapis lazuli with 4 separate dials. The pendulum, a heavy brass disc the size of a dinner plate, hung motionless behind the beveled glass door. It was silent, a dead giant standing in the center of the house. Standing in front of it, staring up at the frozen hands, was Alistair Vane. He was a small man, withered by age, leaning heavily on a cane topped with silver skull. He wore a tuxedo that seemed a size too large for his shrinking frame. He wore a mask, too, a simple white porcelain mask that covered his entire face, leaving only holes for his eyes. It was terrifying in its simplicity. A blank face staring at a broken clock. It stopped. Vane said, his voice raspy and thin like dry leaves blowing over stone. It stopped at 11:59. 20 years ago. Mechanical failure. I asked, setting down my bag on the marble floor. The sound echoed in the vast space. No, Vane said. He did not turn to look at me. Grief. It stopped the night my wife died. I paused. I knew the story. Everyone in the village knew the story. The local legend said Vane's wife Alara had fallen from the Widow's Walk on New Year Eve 2 decades ago. It was ruled a suicide, a tragic accident. But rumors persisted that she had not jumped. Rumors whispered that she had been pushed. I wanted to start again, Vane said. Tonight, when the ball drops, it must chime. It must signal that I am done mourning. I need to open the casing, I said. I need silence. You have until the guests move into this room for the countdown, Vane said. Fix it. He turned and limped away, the tap, tap, tap of his cane echoing on the marble floor. He looked like a ghost haunting his own house. I was alone with the machine. I opened the glass case. The smell of old oil and stagnant time drifted out. It was a dusty metallic scent. I put on my jeweler loop and began to work. Mechanics is a language. If you listen, the gears speak to you. I traced the escapement. The mainspring was wound tight, too tight. The tension was immense. It was holding 20 years of potential energy locked by a jammed lever. This was not a simple fix. This was a surgery. I worked for 2 hours. My hands were stained with grease. The music from the ballroom drifted in a waltz light, an airy masking the storm outside. At 9 o'clock, I took a break. My back ached from leaning into the clock case. I needed water. I stepped out of the atrium and headed toward the kitchen. The house was a maze of corridors and shadows. As I passed the library, I heard voices. The door was ajar, just a sliver. You cannot cut me out, Alistair. Not after everything I have done. A male voice. Angry. Young. Slurring slightly as if he had already had too much champagne. You have done nothing but gamble and drink. Julian Vane's voice replied, cold and hard. The estate goes to the trust. It is decided. I am announcing it at midnight. You cannot. The family will not stand for it. The family are vultures. I am ending the feast. If you announce that the younger man hissed, you will not live to see the sunrise. Is that a threat? It is a forecast. I hurried past, my heart thumping against my ribs. Julian. That would be Julian Vane, the nephew. The heir apparent. The man who stood to lose everything if Alistair Vane changed his will. I reached the kitchen. It was a war zone of catering. Steam rose from pots of boiling lobster. Chefs shouted orders. Waiters loaded silver trays with canapes. I grabbed a bottle of water from a side cooler and leaned against the wall, trying to stay out of the way. I felt like an intruder in this world of wealth and excess. A woman in a red silk dress walked in. She was wearing a black lace mask that covered her eyes. She wasn't staff. She was a guest. She walked with a strange, purposeful stride. She went straight to the rack of knives on the magnetic strip by the prep station. She did not see me. I was in the shadows by the pantry door. She reached out and touched the handle of a boning knife. It was a wicked-looking thing, thin, and sharp designed to separate meat from bone. Her fingers lingered on the black handle. Then she saw a sous chef looking at her. She pulled her hand back, quickly smoothed her dress, and grabbed a paper napkin instead. Just spilled some wine, she muttered, and walked out fast. I frowned. Why was a guest in the kitchen looking at knives? And why did she look so guilty? I finished my water and went back to the clock. At 10:30, I found the problem. A tiny pin no bigger than a grain of rice had been inserted into the gear train of the striker mechanism. It was not a broken part. It was sabotage. Someone had deliberately jammed the clock 20 years ago. They had stopped time on purpose. I pulled the pin out with my fine-point tweezers. The gears groaned. They shifted. The pendulum gave a shudder. Tick, tock. The sound was loud in the silent atrium. A heartbeat restarting after a long coma. It was a slow, heavy sound. I exhaled. I had done it. You fixed it. I jumped, dropping my tweezers. Standing behind me was a woman. She was young, perhaps 25. She wore a silver dress that shimmered like fish scales and a mask made of mirrored shards that reflected the room in 100 broken pieces. I did, I said, picking up my tool. That is unfortunate, she said. Her voice was brittle. Unfortunate? Mr. Vane paid a lot of money for this. Uncle Alistair thinks time heals all wounds, she said. But time just lets the infection spread. You are his niece. Cassandra, she said. Julian's sister. The other heir. She looked at the clock with pure hatred. He is going to change the will tonight, she said. At midnight, when the clock strikes. He loves theatrics. I heard. If that clock does not strike, she whispered, he cannot make the announcement. He is superstitious. He thinks the clock controls the luck of the house. If it fails, he will take it as a sign. She looked at me. Her eyes behind a mirror mask were cold and calculating. How much would it cost to break it again? I stared at her. I am a professional, Miss Vane. I fix things. I do not break them. She laughed a sharp, cold sound. Everyone has a price. What is yours? The rent on your sad little shop? A new van? My integrity, I said, closing the glass case and locking it with a small brass key. Integrity does not buy heating oil, she said. She turned to leave, her dress rustling like dry leaves. Watch your back clock, girl. Accidents happen in this house, especially on New Year Eve. I stood there watching the pendulum swing. Tick, tock. It felt like a countdown. But a countdown to what? At 11:30, the guests began to filter into the atrium. The masquerade was in full swing. The noise was overwhelming. Laughter, the clink of crystal glasses, the swell of the orchestra. It was a cacophony of wealth. Waiters passed trays of champagne. The air grew hot and heavy. I stood in the corner, wiping my hands on a rag. I wanted to leave. I had finished the job. But the causeway was flooded now. The tide had come in. I was trapped until morning. Trapped in this house of secrets and knives. I scanned the room looking for faces I recognized behind the masks. There was Julian Vane wearing a leather wolf mask, drinking heavily near the stairs. He was arguing with a man in a jester costume, his hands moving wildly. There was Cassandra, the mirror mask, reflecting the chandelier lights like a disco ball, whispering to the woman in the red dress, the one I had seen in the kitchen. And there was Alistair Vane. He stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the crowd like a king surveying his subjects. He was still wearing the white porcelain mask. It gleamed under the lights. He raised a hand. The music stopped instantly. My friends, he rasped. His voice was amplified by the acoustics of the dome. Enemies. Family. A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. 20 years ago, this house fell silent, Alistair said. Tonight we wake it up. He pointed to the clock. At the stroke of midnight, the Chronos Aeterna will sound. And when the final chime fades, I will make an announcement regarding the future of the Vane legacy. A future that will surprise many of you. Julian crushed his champagne glass in his hand. It shattered. Blood dripped onto the marble floor, but he did not seem to notice. He just stared up at his uncle with eyes full of fury. 10 minutes, Alistair shouted. Drink. Dance. For tomorrow everything changes. The music swelled again. A frantic, fast-paced waltz. The guests swirled. Colors blurred. Masks turned toward masks. I looked at the clock. 11:50. 10 minutes. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Graves the butler. "Mr. Vane requests you in the library," he said. Immediately. "Now, he is on the stairs." He went down the back way. "He wants to give you your check before the announcement. He wishes to settle all debts before the new year." I nodded. I grabbed my bag. I followed Graves through the crush of people out of the atrium down the long hallway to the library. The library was dark. Only the fire was lit, casting long dancing shadows on the walls of books. "Wait here," Graves said. "He will be with you shortly." He closed the door. I heard the lock click. I frowned. I walked to the door and tried the handle. "Locked." "Graves," I shouted. Silence. I was locked in. "Why?" I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner of the library. 11:55. 5 minutes to midnight. Why lock the repairwoman in the library 5 minutes before the main event? Unless they did not want me to see something. Or unless they wanted to frame me for not being where I was supposed to be. Or worse, unless I was meant to be a scapegoat. I ran to the window. It looked out onto the terrace. The storm was raging outside a wall of white snow. I grabbed a heavy brass bookend from the desk. I smashed the window latch. The glass shattered inward. I climbed out into the snow. The wind hit me like a physical blow, freezing the sweat on my skin. I ran along the terrace, slipping on ice, aiming for the French doors of the atrium. I had to get back. I had a bad feeling. A very bad feeling. The kind of feeling you get when a mainspring is about to snap. I reached the atrium doors. I peered through the glass. Inside, the party was reaching a fever pitch. The crowd was counting down. 10, 9. Alistair Vane was back on the stairs. Or someone in a tuxedo and a white mask was on the stairs. 8. He was standing right next to the clock. 7. I saw movement in the shadows behind the clock. A figure. 6. The figure in the shadows raised something. A heavy object. 5. I banged on the glass. "Look out!" But the glass was thick. The music was loud. No one heard me. They were lost in the ecstasy of the countdown. 4. 3. The figure behind the clock struck. They hit the back of the clock casing. Hard. 2. The impact shook the tall, heavy structure. The clock wobbled. It tipped. 1. The massive Chronos Aeterna, 20 feet of solid oak and brass and glass, toppled forward. "Happy New Year." The crowd screamed, but it was not a cheer. The clock crashed down onto the marble floor with a sound that shook the foundations of the house. Glass exploded. Gears flew like shrapnel. And beneath the wreckage, Alistair Vane. The clock had fallen directly on top of him. Silence. Then chaos. I kicked the French door. The lock snapped. I burst into the room covered in snow. "Don't touch it," I shouted. But people were already rushing forward. Julian, Cassandra. They heaved the heavy wood of the clock off the body. Alistair Vane lay on the black and white tiles. His tuxedo was torn. His white mask was cracked down the middle. But there was something wrong. There was no blood. The clock must have crushed him. It weighed a ton, but he was not flattened. I pushed through the crowd. I knelt beside him. I touched his neck. Cold, stone cold, and stiff. Rigor mortis. I looked at the crowd. The noise died down. "He is dead," I said. "The clock killed him," Julian shouted. "It fell on him. It was unstable. It is her fault." He pointed at me. "The repair girl. She did not secure it." "No," I said, my voice rising. "Look at him." I reached out and pulled the cracked white mask off the face. The crowd gasped. It was Alistair Vane. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. His skin was blue. "He did not die just now," I said. "He is cold. He is stiff." I looked up at Julian, at Cassandra, at the woman in red. "This man has been dead for hours." But Cassandra stammered. "He was just standing there. He was waving his arms." "Someone was propping him up," I said. Or I looked at the balcony above the stairs. Wire, fishing line, tied to the wrist of the tuxedo. Leading up to the railing. He was a puppet, I whispered. Someone strung up a corpse to make the countdown. "Murder," a woman screamed. Lock the door, someone else shouted. I stood up. I looked at the shattered remains of clock I had just fixed. The gears were scattered. The pendulum was bent. And in the middle of the wreckage, sticking out of Alistair vein, chest concealed by the tuxedo jacket, until the impact tore it open, a knife, a boning knife, the same kind of knife I had seen the woman in red looking at in the kitchen. Midnight had struck. The new year had arrived, and the dead body at the ball had been dead since last year. The house was sealed. Not by the police. They could not get across the causeway until the tide went out at 6 in the morning. By nature, and by us, we moved the guests into the drawing room. 50 people terrified, drunk on champagne and fear. I took charge, not because I wanted to, but because no one else was rational. Julian was shouting for brandy. Cassandra was weeping hysterically or pretending to. Graves, the butler, was standing by the door like a statue. Nobody leaves this room, I said. There's a killer among us. Who put you in charge? Julian sneered. You are the hired help. You are the one who broke the clock. The clock did not kill him, Julian. He was stabbed, hours ago, stabbed with a boning knife. From the kitchen, I looked at the woman in the red dress. She was sitting on a velvet sofa, fanning herself with a napkin. You, I said. What is your name? She looked up. Isabella. Isabella Thorne. Thorne, you are related to the Vanes. Julian, ex-wife, she said. I was invited. Alistair wanted to make peace. I saw you in the kitchen, I said, looking at the knives. At 9 o'clock, the room went silent. I was looking for a bottle opener. She said smoothly, I did not take a knife. We will see, I said. I turned to Graves. Where was Alistair before the ball? In his study, Graves said. He locked himself in at 8 o'clock. He said he was not to be disturbed until 11:45. So someone got into the study between 8 and 11:45, stabbed him, dragged his body to the stairs, rigged him up with wire, and pushed the clock over at midnight to hide the crime. It seems elaborate, Graves noted. It is theatrical, I said, like the Janus theme. 2 faces. I looked at the clock on the mantelpiece. 12:30 a.m. We have 5.5 hours until the police can get here, I said. I'm going to look at the study. Graves, you have the key. I do. Come with me. The rest of you stay here. I walked out of the drawing room. The hallway was empty, littered with streamers and empty glasses. The party debris looked like the aftermath of a battle. We reached the study. The door was locked. Graves used his master key. We entered. The study was a mess. Books pulled off shelves. Drawers pulled out and overturned. Papers scattered everywhere. Someone had tossed the room. They were looking for something, I said. The will, Graves said. The new will. He was going to sign it tonight. I walked to the desk. The leather surface was slashed. If they killed him before he signed it, I said, then the old will stands. Who benefits from the old will? Graves hesitated. Julian and Cassandra, he said. They split the estate 50-50. And the new will, everything to the Historic Preservation Trust. The family gets nothing. Motive, £50 million worth of motive. But both of them, working together, they hated each other. I looked at the fireplace. There was a pile of ash in the grate, still warm. I grabbed the fire poker and sifted through the ash. Fragments of paper, thick legal paper. Someone had burned the will. But wait, if they burned the new will, why the theatrics? Why rig the body? Why the clock? Why not just leave him in the study and make it look like a robbery? Because they needed the time of death to be confused. They needed everyone to think he died at midnight. Why? To give themselves an alibi for the real time of death. Graves, I said, who has an alibi for 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Everyone was getting ready for the ball, Mississippi. In their rooms. No witnesses. None. Perfect. I looked at the desk again. There was a calendar. A heavy leather-bound planner, open to December. December 31st was circled in red ink. Written in the square in Alistair's jagged handwriting, meeting with the watchmaker. The watchmaker, I asked, touching the paper. That is me, but I did not have a meeting. I had a job. Perhaps he meant someone else, Graves said, his voice devoid of emotion. I looked closer at the paper scraps in the fire. One piece was not fully burned. It was curled at the edges black and brittle, but the image in the center remained. It was a corner of a photograph. It showed a woman, young, beautiful, standing on a balcony in the snow, wearing a white fur coat. She was smiling, but her eyes looked sad. "Who is this?" I asked Graves, holding the fragment up to the firelight. He peered at it. His stony face cracked just for a second. A flicker of something like pain passed behind his eyes. "That is Isla Wrynne, Mr. Alistair's late wife, the one who died 20 years ago." Why would he be burning a photo of his wife on the night he died? I do not know. I pocketed the photo fragment. It felt warm against my palm. "I need to see the body again," I said. "I need to see the knots." We went back to the atrium. The guests were gone, locked in the drawing room. The body lay alone on the cold marble, surrounded by the wreckage of time. The silence was heavy, pressing down on us like water. I examined the wrists. Fishing line. Thin, translucent, but incredibly strong. Tied in a complex knot. A figure-8 loop. "Do you recognize this knot?" I asked Graves. "It is a sailor knot," he said. "An angler loop. Used for securing lines under tension." "Who here sails?" "Master Julian has a yacht. Miss Cassandra spends summers in Ibiza on boats." "Anyone else?" "Miss Isabella. She grew up in a fishing village. Her father was a trawler captain. 3 suspects, all with knowledge of knots, all with a motive, all with the opportunity to slip away during the chaos of the ball preparation. But the clock. Why destroy the clock?" I walked over to the shattered mechanism. The gears I had fixed were bent and twisted. The brass was dull in the dim light. But something caught my eye. Inside the base of the clock, where the pendulum weight used to be, there was a false bottom, a hidden compartment. The wood had splintered open when it crashed, revealing a dark, hollow space. And inside the false bottom, a ledger, a black book bound in leather worn at the corners. I reached in and pulled it out. It was not a financial ledger. It was a diary, Alistair Vane diary. I opened it to the last entry, dated today, December 31st. "The guilt is too much. I cannot keep the secret anymore. 20 years is enough. Tonight, when the clock strikes, I will tell them. I did not just lose my wife that night. I pushed her. My breath caught in my throat. Alistair Vane killed his wife." The text continued, the ink dark and heavy on the page. "And I was not alone. One of them saw me. One of them helped me cover it up. And for 20 years they have blackmailed me. They have drained this state dry. That is why I am changing the will, to cut off the leech. Tonight, I expose the blackmailer." I closed the book. My hands were shaking. This was not about the inheritance. Not really. It was about blackmail. Someone in this house knew Alistair was a murderer. Someone had been bleeding him for decades, taking money in exchange for silence. And when he decided to confess, they silenced him. Who was old enough? Julian and Cassandra were children 20 years ago. They would have been too young to understand, too young to orchestrate a cover-up. Graves? I looked at the butler. He was staring at the body, his face unreadable in the shadows. "Graves," I said slowly, "where were you 20 years ago tonight?" "I was here in Mississippi serving drinks." "Did you see Isla Wrynne fall?" "No. I found the body." "Did you?" He looked at me. His eyes were cold gray flint. "Miss Wrynne, are you accusing me?" "I am asking. The blackmailer is in this house." Suddenly the lights went out. Pitch black. The storm howled outside, rattling the broken window panes. The generator Graves said, his voice calm in the darkness. "The fuel must be low." Or someone cut the line. I whispered. I heard footsteps running on the marble. Fast light steps. "Who is there?" I shouted. A whoosh of air. A heavy impact. I was shoved hard. I fell backward over the clock, wreckage my arm, scraping against broken glass. I hit my head on the floor. Stars burst in my eyes. I heard the diary being ripped from my hand. No, I scrambled up, slipping on the polished floor. A beam of a flashlight cut through the dark. It was not Graves. Graves was shouting from the hallway, his voice echoing. The beam hit a figure running toward the stairs. A figure in a red dress. Isabella. Isabella the first screamed. She turned. The flashlight beam caught her face. It was twisted in a rictus of panic and rage. She had the diary clutched to her chest, and she had a second knife in her other hand. He was going to ruin everything, she screamed. I kept a secret. I deserved that money. She was a blackmailer. But she was not alone. A second figure stepped out of the shadows at the top of the stairs. A man in a torn tuxedo wearing a leather wolf mask. Julian, give me the book, Bella, Julian said, calmly. You knew, she hissed. You knew he killed your aunt? I knew someone was draining the accounts, Julian said, stepping down one stair then another. I did not know it was you. My dear ex-wife. He killed her, Isabella shouted. I saw him push her. I was 12 years old, hiding on the balcony. I saw it all. And you grew up, I said, stepping forward into the flashlight beam. And you married Julian to get close to the money. And when you divorced, you kept the blackmail going. It was my pension, she spat. And tonight I asked. He told you he was going to confess. He called me to the study, she said. He laughed at me. Said he was done paying. Said he would rather rot in jail than give me another penny. He turned his back on me to pour a drink. So you stabbed him. I grabbed the knife from the tray. I did not think I just struck. And then I panicked. I called Julian. I looked at Julian. You help her? Julian shrugged. He looked like a wolf in his leather mask, predatory and dangerous. She called me, screaming. I came to the study. He was dead. The will was on the desk and signed. If the police came, then the estate would be frozen for years. Investigated. The blackmail would come out. The scandal. So you devised a plan, I said. The masquerade. We needed him alive until midnight, Julian said. To keep the guests calm. To let the new year ring in. So we rigged him. The wire. The mask. It was surprisingly easy. And the clock? That was my touch, Julian smiled. A dramatic accident to cover the wound. The clock falls, crushes the chest. Who looks for a stab wound when a man is flattened by a ton of oak? But the clock was fixed, I said. I fixed it. Exactly, Julian said. We needed it to strike. To draw everyone's eyes. To be the distraction. But you were too good. You fixed it too well. You noticed the pin I jammed in it years ago. You jammed it? 20 years ago, Julian said. To stop the time. To freeze the memory of the aunt I loved. Irony, is it not? I broke it for love. I destroyed it for money. And now I asked, what happens to the witness? Julian raised a gun. A small pearl-handled pistol that looked like a toy but was deadly serious. Now, he said, we have a tragic intruder. A thief who broke in during the storm. You. Isabella looked at him. Julian, you cannot. Shut up, Bella. You are next if you do not play along. He aimed at me. Goodbye, Miss Wrynne. Happy New Year. Click. The hammer fell. No bang. Julian frowned. He pulled the trigger again. Click. Nothing. Looking for these? A voice from the darkness. Graves stepped out holding a handful of bullets. They glinted in the flashlight beam. I took the liberty of unloading the master pistols when the storm started. Graves said calmly, standard procedure during family gatherings. You are all so volatile. Julian roared and threw the gun at Graves. He lunged for Isabella, grabbing the diary. It is mine. They struggled on the stairs. The red dress. The black tuxedo. They slipped. Isabella screamed. They tumbled down the marble steps, a tangle of limbs and greed. They hit the bottom with a sickening crunch. Silence returned to the atrium. I walked over to them. They were groaning, broken but alive. The diary lay open on the floor, its pages fluttering in the draft from a broken window. I picked it up. Graves stood beside me. The police will be here at dawn, he said. Yes, I said. I looked at the shattered clock. Graves, I said. What time is it? He checked his pocket watch. It is 12:01 a.m., Miss Wrynne. A new day, I said. Indeed. I looked at the snow swirling through the broken window, covering the black and white floor. The mask was off. The clock was broken. But the truth was ticking loud and clear. The dawn came slowly, a reluctant gray light that filtered through the broken windows of Blackwood Hall. The storm had passed, leaving the world silent, and white buried under 3 feet of snow. The police arrived with the sunrise. Their blue lights flashed against the snow, a jarring modern intrusion into the Gothic tableau. Julian and Isabella were taken away in ambulances under guard. They would spend the rest of their lives trading accusations in court, a bitter duet that would end in prison cells. I watched them go from the terrace, my breath misting in the cold air. Graves stood beside me holding a thermos of coffee. "You saved the house," I said. "By unloading the gun." "I saved the furniture," Miss Wrynne Graves replied, pouring me a cup. "Bloodstains are notoriously difficult to remove from marble." I smiled, a weak, tired smile. "What will happen to the estate?" I asked. "The trust will take over," Graves said. "As Mr. Vane intended. It will become a museum, a monument to time." "And the clock?" He looked at the pile of wreckage in the atrium. "It is broken beyond repair." "No," I said. "Nothing is beyond repair. It just needs time." I was asked to restore the Chronos Aeterna properly this time. It took me a year. I worked in the silent house through the spring, summer, and autumn. I replaced the bent gears. I polished the brass. I reset the escapement. I found peace in the work. The rhythmic logic of the machine was a balm after the chaos of that night. And as I worked, I found other things hidden in the clock. Not diaries or secrets, but memories. A locket with a lock of hair. A note written by Isla Wrynne on her wedding day. Small tokens of a life that had been lived before the tragedy. I realized that Alistair Vane had not just been a murderer. He had been a man haunted by a moment of madness, a man who tried to stop time because he could not bear to move forward. But time moves forward. It always does. The next New Year Eve, I stood in the atrium. Alone. The guests were ghosts now. The drama was history. The house was a museum, clean and empty and quiet. Graves was there standing in the shadows watching. I wound the mainspring. I set the hands. 11:59. I waited. Tick, tock. The sound was strong, steady. A heartbeat. The minute hand clicked. Midnight. The chimes began. They were deep, resonant, beautiful. They rang out across the sea, singing to the waves. They filled the house with music, chasing away the silence of 20 years. It sounded like forgiveness. I looked at Graves. He nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of approval. "Happy New Year, Graves," I said. "Happy New Year, Miss Wrynne." I walked out of the house into the cold, clear night. The stars were bright overhead. The ocean was calm. Time had started again. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to face the future.